376 words before I quoted Scarlett O'Hara. Allow me to weave a tapestry of words, punctuated by a neurotic cadence that dances along the precipice of reality and absurdity. This is a work of fiction, a theatrical ode inspired by the shimmering souls that form the vibrant patchwork of the Beaumont family, a family both glorious and grotesque in their eccentricity. In this exploration, you may encounter characters that echo the flamboyant essence of female impersonators, drag queens, and assorted LGBT entertainers who have graced my life like radiant fireflies on a sultry southern night. Each figure is a tribute, a beacon, illuminating the paths of love and laughter that might otherwise be drenched in a heavier melancholy, reminding us all how extraordinarily dull our lives would be without their vivaciousness. The events laid bare herein are as fictitious as they are outlandish, echoes of the absurd mingling with threads of truth, some long woven into the fabric of my existence. The Southern Gothic, that exquisite bouquet of sweet petals and sharp thorns, is my homage to the towering titans of the genre. These literary giants have crafted worlds where language blooms like magnolias under a sultry moon. Yet in my clumsy hands, it transforms into a sparkly, sequined masquerade, an outrageous homage to the tragic pulchritude of Vivien Leigh's portrayals of Scarlett O'Hara and Blanche Dubois. Set in a fictionalized southern U.S., the landscapes depict a reality that ought not to be read as a scathing farce, but rather as an affectionate glance from the vantage of one who embraces the duality of belonging and alienation. Being Southern is a badge I wear proudly, though I often feel like a specter drifting through a reenactment battlefield of blue and gray cavalries, wielding double-edged swords, one of progression and condemnation, the other of tradition and bigotry. I extend an invitation to appreciate the art and beauty inherent in the moonlight and magnolia-scented myths of the South. I issue a challenge to understand the realities behind those myths, at times triumphant, often painfully cruel. As we stumble our way to a new South, one of inclusion and diversity, an appreciation for both sides of this narrative tapestry is essential, to truly allow it to rise again amidst the laughter and the tears that bind us all. As God is my witness, as God is my witness, this ain't going to lick me, and when it is all over, I will have written a book. If I have to down bottles of Dr. Pepper, pots of coffee, and sip the good bourbon from fine china teacups, as God is my witness, I won't quote Miss Scarlett again. Somewhere in the depths of Mississippi, William Faulkner untangles the complex web of Southern life, exploring themes of time, memory, and human folly with haunting lyricism. His narratives swirl like the fog of a haunting dawn, rich in detail and steeped in history. I often find myself lost in his intricate prose, grappling with the weight of the past on my own shoulders. How I wish to gain clarity from such eloquent chaos.
A bottle of whiskey, a dead husband, and goose drowning rain. As the storm raged outside, the winds howled like the anguished cries of a scorned heart, a hollow echoing in the damp southern air that clung to my skin like the heavy humidity of this forsaken night. I remember him so vividly, his shadow gliding through the Georgian halls of our grand but crumbling manor, arrogance written on his brow, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. In those moments, I was the ghost haunting those hallowed rooms, as I found my way out of the door, transforming into a figure cloaked in the moss-draped shadows of the live oaks that line the winding path to the wetlands. I led him, my unsuspecting husband, through the darkened yard where cypress trees loomed like silent sentinels, their knotted roots reaching deep into the mud like the tangled threads of our broken vows. The alligators awaited beneath the surface, their hungry eyes shimmering with cruel anticipation. As I watched him slip into their embrace, the very waters that swallowed his treachery, while the storm danced above us, a wicked symphony of nature echoing my triumph. The crash of thunder and the blinding flash of lightning shoved me abruptly out of the storm clouds on memory and into present dangers being blown in on tropical winds around me as I sipped aged bourbon from a delicate teacup, a ridiculous tradition of refinement amongst the women of my family. The old plantation house loomed above wet landscaping with its wildness, struggling against the age-old shackles of well-manicured, stretching out and grasping for the surrounding creeks and wetlands, quickly filling in the heavy rain. A grand yet weary relic of a time long past, shrouded in the fading light of dusk as a tropical storm descended upon its weathered facade. 3 stories rose sharply into the oncoming darkness, supported by large white columns that had turned a subdued gray from years of storm and sun, their textures a tactile history of endurance. The brick exterior bore scabs of discoloration, and patches of green vegetation clung stubbornly around the windows, as if nature itself was reclaiming what society had once fought over. Blue shutters, peeling and faded, adorned the lower windows, while the balcony above danced with ornate white-wrought iron that struggled under its own weight. In the foreground, fallen leaves and shredded remnants of magnolia blossoms, strewn across the ground, whipped and swirled in the gathering wind, drawing my gaze to the heart of this tangible memory, the main entrance where a large blue door stood watch, flanked by scuffed and worn windows guarding the secrets of centuries. Like the furrows etched into the face of a wise old matron, the house bore witness to the joys of antebellum celebrations and the oppressive haunt of its history. Its walls had soaked in the laughter of jubilant weddings and extravagant parties that reverberated through the halls back in the 1700s and early 1800s, a time when the South wore its pride like a lace collar, high and undeniably splendorous. Yet, these joyous accolades were layered beneath the grim realities of a society that thrived on the backs of the oppressed, staring down the specters of the peculiar institution of slavery. Each brick seemed to tell a tale of sorrow and pride, of watching cavalrymen in gray depart into glorious battles, only to be met with the anxious terror of their blue-clad adversaries returning, marking the end of an era with destruction and despair. The darkest remembrances clung to the corners of this house, like the shadows that gathered during its most sorrowful days. The frightened faces of young black girls, huddled in the deathly silence of night, illuminated only by the terrifying glow of a flaming cross. They crouched behind a defiant figure, a young woman fierce in her resolve, with long curly black hair cascading down her back, leveling the barrels of a shotgun against the advancing clan in all their white-robed horror. The wooden sign bearing the words, "School for Colored Girls," trembled in the wind before splintering under their crude hands, evoking a past filled with heartbreak and courage. Years of neglect had weathered this place. Boarded-up windows mirrored the abandonment felt by a community long forgotten, yet within that same space were whispers of innocence, more recent memories of a freckled, red-haired girl playing with dolls, sharing secret laughter with her friend who sported an unforgettable head of Beaumont black curls. Joy trickling through the cracks of the plantation's history like sunlight on a rainy day. As the tropical storm surged, the air thickened with foreboding, amplified by the violent dance of tree limbs swaying in the gusting winds. Spanish moss swung like pendulums, draping the trees in a dark shroud while the churning clouds gathered above, forming a tumultuous canopy that threatened to unleash its fury. Rain began to hammer down in bursts, hitting the ground with a sickening rhythm, and the atmosphere felt imbued with the weight of old secrets anxious to escape. In the distance, a blue sedan flicked its headlights off, creeping along the wet, sandy drive that wound its way through the twisted oak trees, trembling in nature's fury. Their bark creaked as the wind howled, echoing the restless spirits that wandered this haunted ground, begging for acknowledgement beneath a storm-ready sky. A decade had slipped by after the night my dearly departed mistake gruesomely became dinner for the alligators, as each year marked by the relentless passage of time. Yet the memory of that stormy night remained as vivid as the lightning that cleaved the sky. Ironically, on the very anniversary of his death, the heavens unleashed another tempest. Swirling gray clouds mirrored the turmoil of my heart, as if the universe conspired to bind me forever to the shadows of our tragic romance. The rain pounded against the weathered timbers of the old plantation, a ghostly echo of the chaos that had once consumed us, reminding me that some wounds, no matter how deep, refuse to heal. The storm had cut the power a couple of hours earlier, and I sat there in the increasing darkness, listening to the weatherman out of Charleston on the radio drones on about how he had seen much worse. He pointed out a truth that even the most casual tourist on a carriage tour would know: the streets of historic downtown were always vulnerable to flooding. I couldn't help but groan at his tongue-in-cheek remark that the sweltering heat alone could bring on floods from the horse sweat. With a flick of my wrist, I switched off the radio, seeking to silence his humor in that heavy moment. I needed to take to my bed before the house grew totally dark. I pushed myself up from the table, the unease wrapped tightly around me, and made my way through the dim foyer, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and old sorrows. Shadows danced along the walls, shifting in the flickering luminosity of the storm outside as I climbed the worn staircase, each step creaking with a familiarity that resonated deep within my bones. Entering my bedroom, I instinctively reached for the light switch, even though I knew it wouldn't work. A small flicker of hope clung to the action, a remnant of habits formed in lighter days. With a resigned sigh, I changed into my white nightgown, the fabric smooth against my skin, offering a fleeting sense of comfort amidst the chaos. Slipping beneath the covers, I felt the chill of the sheets seep into me, but the relentless roar of the storm outside held me captive, wind shrieking against the eaves and rain hammering the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. The cacophony made it nearly impossible to quiet my racing thoughts, yet as I lay there, eyes fluttering against the relentless soundscape, exhaustion eventually wrapped itself around me, pulling me into a restless sleep that felt as though it haunted my very soul. I jolted awake, my heart thundering like the tempest outside, and there he stood, his specter etched in the dim, flickering light of the storm, a silhouette that seemed both familiar and grotesquely foreign. The wind howled through the cracks of the old plantation walls, yet the air in my room felt heavy, stagnant, as if the very essence of his betrayal clung to the shadows. His face, the same handsome visage I had once adored, now dripped with an eerie, ethereal glow. The remorse I had yearned for manifested not in the warmth of flesh, but in cold, spectral anguish. A wave of irritation crashed over me, drowning out the surprise. I had come to terms with my past, carved out my own existence amid the ghosts of this dilapidated manor, and here he was, uninvited, stirring up memories I did not wish to revisit. "What do you want?" I managed to hiss, my voice barely audible above the crashing rain, knowing deep down that this haunting was but a reflection of my own restless spirit, forever shackled to the scars of love lost and betrayal sealed in the dark waters of our shared history. I remember the night I first laid eyes on my dearly departed mistake with a clarity that feels almost cruel. A snapshot frozen in the haze of dim lights and smoky air at some basement dive bar, featuring drag queens, female impersonators, in Raleigh, North Carolina, where laughter mingled with the sultry sounds of the blues. The stage was alive with drama, a towering figure in sequins, swaying to the rhythm, belting out a song that humorously revolved around the oddities of cooking a chicken but confusing it with a duck. I sat there, gingerly sipping on a blue concoction, a deceptive, vibrant brew that tastes like a Long Island iced tea dipped in blue raspberry syrup. My heart fluttering as an entrancing entertainer, with all the grace of a Southern belle transformed before my eyes into a vision of Marilyn Monroe, sweetly singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President." Just as I found myself swept up in the performance, A peculiar edition of a John Kennedy impersonator burst onto the stage to lip sync, with his Marilyn a duet rendition of Mockingbird, catching me off guard as the laughter crescendoed. In that delightful chaos, my future husband swayed too close, his cheap beer cascading over my lap, sealing our fate with an accident that felt destined. Reflecting on such a serendipitous meeting, I can't help but think that perhaps if I had met someone else as I reached for the same fried chicken leg at the Methodist annual dinner on the grounds, I might have achieved a sweeter, simpler outcome. The sparks of that initial encounter quickly dulled in the reality of our life together, consumed by an ever-growing list of arguments laced with bitterness and betrayal, fueled by his infidelity. Those heated moments crescendoed to nights like this, where I would find myself standing in the darkened corner of our home, my voice rising in desperation, yelling, "William Henry Green, what the hell do you want?" The echoes of my words would cling to the walls like ghosts, lingering reminders of a passion that had turned sour in the shadows of our once promising beginnings. In the darkened bedroom, I glared at the spirit standing before me, a figure both familiar and haunting, as if it had stepped from the recesses of my mind. The mahogany furnishings loomed just barely visible in the obscurity, their elegant lines silhouetted against the shadowed walls. With each flash of lightning that illuminated the room, the details burst forth like secrets dragged into light, transforming dread into stark clarity. The room was dominated by my four-poster canopy bed, a magnificent centerpiece that commanded attention. Its rich mahogany wooden frame showcased intricate carvings, delicate floral motifs woven into the very essence of the headboard and footboard. Each ominous flash revealed the ornate paneling, as though the bed itself was a silent witness to the tales whispered beneath its luxurious white canopy, the sheer fabric tied into knots at the bases, an eerie echo of a bygone era. The white linens crumpled on the bed, the pile's pillows still fluffed, just so except the one on the left edge, the impression of my head in its center, and a thick comforter featuring a pattern of delicate yellow flowers was tossed back hastily. Flanking the bed stood two matching nightstands, their dark wood grain marked with age, each curve etched with history. The left one cradled a small pink object, its purpose lost in the shadows, while the right held a gold-colored box that glistened like a treasure amid the somber ambiance. Dark gray wainscoting rose up the walls, adorned with soft yellow and brown floral patterns that wrapped the room in an inviting hush, so out of place in the presence of ethereal unrest. Large French doors, flanked on each side by floor-to-ceiling windows, loomed on the left wall, framed by sheer white curtains billow softly. Each time the storm crackled, paler shafts of light spilled through the panes, etching delicate shadows across the light blue patterned carpet below, designs of subtle geometric shapes whispering their stories of order and chaos intertwined. The ceiling seemed to loom higher, its pure whiteness catching the light, the crown molding, framing a modern white ceiling fan that spun lazily, indifferent to the storm brewing both outside and within. With another jagged bolt of lightning, the spirit stood firm before me, an unsettling presence against the backdrop of my once sacred space. I felt the weight of centuries bearing down, the air thick with unspoken words, and I fought against the tremors that danced along my spine. "What do you want?" I hissed again, the pretense of calm fraying as I met its gaze, emboldened by the fleeting bursts of light, the only witness to this dark communion animating the shadows around us. I kept my eyes glued to the unwelcome visitor who inhabited the room with a lingering chill, crossing the creaking floorboards to the chifforobe, an antique sturdy enough to withstand the sort of secrets it harbored. When I opened the door, the classic design had been freshly customized, concealing within its chamber a naughty little treasure. I didn't need to trot downstairs for a nightcap, not with the bottles of high-proof elixirs and cut crystal glasses tucked away, gleaming like promises in the dim light. My fingers danced over the delicate glass, but it was a bottle I grabbed instead, any bottle. uncapping it with a snap that echoed through the silence as I took a deep, reckless swig. The whiskey burned down my throat like fire, and I coughed slightly, a harsh reminder of what I just swallowed. But that burn lingered, igniting a warmth that pushed back against the specter before me. I stepped back, determined to take a long, hard look at him, my resolve hardening with every beat of my racing heart. I cocked my head, brushing my long black hair behind my ears, and fixed my gaze upon the ghost of my dead husband. This time my glare softened, shifting to a careful observation as I processed his presence, solid and unyielding, like Georgia red clay, yet emanating an ethereal glow. He stood confidently, a young man suspended in time, like a moment caught between breaths. Voluminous, blonde hair styled in a distinctive mullet, a relic decades out of style, with waves that cascaded past his shoulders in a striking center part. The white-ribbed tank top clung to his muscular frame, accentuating the well-defined arms and chest that bore the marks of life. A tapestry of healed scars that mingled with reminders of gaping wounds left by alligators' teeth and claws. His high-waisted light blue denim jeans, embellished with subtle acanthus leaf motifs, hugged his hips while a silver button glinted softly in the light. A thin gold chain lay against his neck, and a black bracelet with metallic accents adorned his left wrist, giving him an air of quaint confidence. His expression hovered between neutral and self-assured, a slight smile curling his lips as our gazes locked. His right hand casually rested in his pocket while his left dangled at his side, unpretentious yet undeniably present. With the whiskey's warmth coursing through me, I felt a strange desire to reach out to him, to see if I could feel that solid body, or if my fingers would pass through him like acrid cigarette smoke. I couldn't help but to remark with a smirk, "Even dead, you're still so damn trashy looking, but so damn hot." Then again, most of my dear regrets looked as if they were created with Renaissance chisels, with strong chins, well-crafted packages, and lifeless, vacant eyes. I took another swig from the bottle and returned to place it back in its home of discretion, still watching him, less in fear now, but as a cat curious if her attention has found a toy, prey, or something to dash away from. Except for his eyes, which remained locked onto mine like iron shackles, he stood utterly motionless, an impossible statue rendered in otherworldly shades of gray. I lifted my face toward the ceiling, as if I could tear through the layers of existence, searching for an answer or perhaps an escape. "We had an agreement, or at least I thought we did," I said, half to him and half to the empty air surrounding us. "I won't bother the dead again, and they don't bother me." The last words tumbled out in a childish defiance, punctuated by a stamp of my foot that sent a tremor through the stillness. That stamp seemed to rouse him as his arm raised slowly, the eerie grace of his movements contrasting sharply with the tension that gripped the room. His fist clenched tightly, except for the index finger that extended sharply, directly toward the French doors leading onto the veranda. Beyond those doors lay the stormy night, thick darkness shrouded by white shears that fluttered like restless spirits. My eyes traced the path of his pointing finger, an involuntary pull toward whatever lay beyond those barriers. Just as I started to step toward the veranda, drawn by a nebulous urge to pierce the night outside, a shrill ringing of the phone shattered the air from the hallway, jerking my head to the left in surprise. My pulse quickened as a brilliant flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating the dark silhouette of something unseen on the other side of the doors, something my living eyes couldn't quite discern, yet my instincts screamed of its existence, hovering just out of reach, as if time itself hesitated to let what was lost slip back into view. I was trying to hurry through the dark hallway to answer the ringing phone, but stopped abruptly. My eyesight grew out of focus as if I was peering through sunlit water. I felt a familiar sensation that had neglected me for years. In that moment, the house behind me seemed to sigh, its sturdy walls bearing silent witness to the pain and adaptability of those who had come before. History was unfolding, layer upon layer of sorrow and resilience, woven into the very fabric of this place. I could feel the spirits of my ancestors swirling around me, whispering echoes of their past, reminding me that their story was far from over. My eyes shimmered back into focus, and I felt the weight of history bearing down upon me. The house began to testify. The air was thick, saturated with the aromas of sweat, soil, and the faint hint of tobacco. Before me, the sprawling grounds that had once sheltered my ancestors now bore witness to an unsettling scene. An auction was underway, drawing a curious crowd from Charleston, their laughter and chatter swirling like ghosts around the ancient oaks. As I watched, the juxtaposition between the excitable eagerness of the Charlestonians and the palpable dread of those to be sold etched itself into my memory. The townsfolk moved with animated vigor, their voices rising in a chorus of anticipation, eager to inspect the merchandise before them, as if it were only a fine piece of furniture or livestock up for bid. Yet amidst their joviality, a grim undercurrent pulsed through the crowd, a flicker of the dark reality that hung over the proceedings. The enslaved individuals stood at the forefront, their expressions a tapestry of anxiety and despair. Each nervous glance exchanged between them spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of their shared fate. Their attire was meager, a patchwork of worn fabrics clinging to their frames, reflecting both their humanity and their subjugation. The younger faces, marked by resilience, bore the weight of generations lost, while the older ones held stories in their creased foreheads, tales of hardship and survival in a world that sought to erase their identity. The auctioneer, a stout older man of Irish descent, commanded the scene with an unsettling authority. His voice, gravelly and practiced, cut through the crowd. "Step right up, gentlemen. A fine selection today." He gestured dramatically, a sly grin betraying the cruelty of his profession. The sun glinted off his balding head as he moved with a practiced efficiency, his brown jacket fluttering slightly in the warm breeze. Around him, the white plantation owners or their representatives prodded and examined the enslaved individuals with an unsettling detachment. Fingers poked at flesh and fabric, as if assessing livestock rather than human beings. I could feel my heart race, an involuntary response to the sheer indignity being paraded before my eyes, each touch stripping away layers of dignity with every insistent poke. Amidst this horror, I noticed a young man, approximately 25 years old, standing on a long platform with a resigned posture. His breeches hung low around his bare feet, the fabric a faded reminder of his humanity, and I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface of his skin, fighting against a rising tide of humiliation as Thomas Beaumont stretched out his hand to begin an inspection of the intended prize. The young slave's muscles tightened, trying not to flinch or pull away, as the white hand grabbed his manhood, twisting as it was inspected. His eyes darted to the other hand as he casually waved an agreement to a recently called price, and twice more times before "sold" was yelled out to the crowd. The tension continued radiating from him was almost tangible. The last flicker of courage faded away amidst the overwhelming dread as the wind hand released its pressure but began casually stroking him before completely releasing him. Beside him stood a 15-year-old girl, her timid demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. I ached for her. She was of Cherokee and African descent, her features remarkable, yet marred by fear. Her hair glistened in the sun, trailing in silky waves down her back. A very familiar deep black, undeniably beautiful, yet juxtaposed with the brutality of the moment. She averted her gaze, her eyes fixed on the ground, as though trying to dissolve into the earth itself, the weight of her surroundings pressing down on her like a heavy shroud. I stood there, trembling with rage, the very breath in my lungs thick and heavy as I tried to comprehend the casual indifference of these folks, participating in horrors that twisted and unfurled before my eyes like dark tendrils reaching out from the depths of the swamp. Suddenly, everything froze. The clamor of life stilled, noises strangled in silence, and even the pungent scents wafting on the harbor breeze hung suspended like fat raindrops before a downpour. All I could see was the young woman on the platform. She raised her head as if pulled by an unseen force, turning her face toward me with a slow grace that felt like a cruel taunt. Her eyes locked onto mine, piercing through the chaos. And in that moment, she nodded subtly as if we were bound together in this horrific tableau that seemed to suspend time itself just before the world shammered and dissolved into the abyss. The phone's insistent ringing came to an abrupt halt, leaving behind an echo of silence that clung to the air like a stubborn fog. I steadied myself, my palm pressed against the wall for balance, feeling the roughness of the paint beneath my fingers as I shook my head, trying to cast away the haunting events of the night like stubborn cobwebs. Just as a fleeting peace began to settle over me, the phone erupted into a shrill chorus once more, pulling me back into its chaotic grasp. I shuffled toward the source of that obnoxious sound, the old cordless phone lying there, illuminated like a beacon of distraction. "Curl up and die," it flashed on the caller ID, a name that made my stomach churn with equal parts fondness and regret. I could still hear Leslie's laughter chime in, as I had jokingly suggested that kitschy name when she opened her beauty shop in the sunroom of that turn-of-the-century farmhouse just across the road. A name that now felt like an albatross around my neck, a constant reminder of my not-so-innocent meddling. With a reluctant sigh, I pressed the answer button and lifted the phone to my ear. Before I could muster a single word, the receiver burst to life with Leslie's unmistakable voice blazing through the line like a summer storm. "What the hell is wrong? And don't try and tell me nothing, because I always know when you're up to something." She paused for a quick, deep breath, and I could imagine her pacing in the small beauty shop, hands on her hips. "And don't make me come out in this nasty, nasty goose-drowning weather. If this hair gets wet, I'm going to have to set it again. And if that happens, you are going to have to re-roll it." Her tirade wrapped around me, a familiar comfort woven with her brand of chaos, momentarily pushing aside the shadow of the night and reminding me that life, even amidst its trials, could still be filled with laughter and the warmth of friendship.
Oh, my dear friends, I implore you, in the name of all the restless voices simmering inside Mrs. Beaumont's neurotic mind, click that subscribe button and give that little bell a gentle jingle. If you don't, I fear one of us will be condemned to pacing through the witching hours, ensnared by her obsession, dutifully watching a never-ending stream of videos on how to garner more subscribers, while another one of us is trapped singing Delta Dawn in a heart-wrenching looped lament. Let us not suffer this fate together. Spare us the madness and embrace a moment of grace.